Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important, and we will discuss on e-business and e-educations. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. David Schumacher, Mr. Rob, and Mr. Adam. So I want to start from Mr. David Schumacher. How do you want to analyze e-business and e-educations, and this e-business and e-education actually growing in COVID-19 situation? Many people engaging with this kind of business. What is your advice and guideline for uh, small medium enterprise, those who want to involve with e-education and e-business?
Yeah, good morning, Sharif. Nice to be back, and I love the topic today. Something that I've spent a fair amount of my adult life doing, and I think that I need to start with my background and then talk about why I'm interested in where we're at and where we're going. Just briefly, I've been involved in education for probably longer than I would care to recognize, and it parallels my technical career. But I started out teaching for the Air Force many years ago as a technical instructor, teaching technical subjects. Went on to, after my Air Force time, to go through a lot of education, both in person and online, in the technical field, getting certified by Microsoft, for example, as a certified trainer, and then an administrator, and then finally a systems engineer. So that training that I received was both in person and online, where the Air Force training that I provided was all in classroom. Later, I went to work for um, uh, a community college district as an adjunct, teaching classes there, and then decided I really liked that and found myself a permanent position at a private college. Taught there for a while, and then decided I wanted to go back to the quote unquote real world, and but couldn't stay away from education, so taught in an adjunct position there at a couple of different private colleges. Those were just starting to transition from strictly in classroom to online training. Um, you mentioned COVID-19. At the start of COVID-19, I had created a business uh, that teaches people how to get computer certifications and help them through that. And that was entirely in person. And as a result of COVID-19, I was forced into going completely online with that. I fell in love so much with the online experience, I have no intention of going back to doing personal. And this ties into the business, which we'll talk about later, because education is both something that is something that enriches you, but it is also a business from that standpoint. And then one more thing in the background is I'm a lifelong learner and always taking classes. So some of those had started out obviously in the traditional methods of sitting in a classroom. I've tried quote unquote mail order training where lessons are mailed to you and then sent back, and then you go someplace for proctored examinations. Currently, and for the last couple of years, I've been attending university classes online in areas that interest me, and currently that interest in the classes that I'm taking are in small business and entrepreneurship. So the university that I'm using for that is one that's really well experienced in the online position, even though they have the traditional brick and mortar as well. And it's really interesting to see how those adapt. And as we go on this morning, I have some discussion about how that can be done in places like Malaysia without a huge capital investment. So we'll be talking about that a little later. So my interest in all of this today revolves around one of my main interests, which is transhumanism and working with the Transhumanist Party here in the U.S. So that I'm attracted to what's the current tech and what are the trends for future tech. And currently there are some interesting trends for both online education and for online business, and some of those overlap. And I'll mention those as we go on. So good show, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our another world class speaker, Professor Rob. So how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Well, the reason to get involved in education for business right now is there's a severe skill shortage. And it's impacting pretty much all industries. If you don't develop the skills that you're going to need for the next half of this decade, during this half of the decade, you're probably not going to have them. And that includes everything from formal training, things like what Cisco does with their networking academy. Huawei has a similar program, as does IBM. IBM actually goes down into grade school now and begins their program to make sure kids are spending up properly all the way into grade school. Because the companies that have been around for a while recognize that skill shortages can be a company killer. And over the next decade, we're going to have some pretty huge pivots. And as the industry pivots, if you don't have those core skills, you won't be able to make the pivot. The last big pivot we observed was, of course, the pivot to the internet, where we observed a whole bunch of companies that were invulnerable before that pivot go under. And the end result is we have had a very different corporate landscape in the early 2000s, and largely due to the fact that companies lack the skills or capability, particularly in the executive staff, to understand the changes that were occurring and to prepare the companies for it. Even in the technology industry, and you'd figure we'd have this thing sorted by now, we were blindsided by the smartphone, the iPhone. I mean, just a series of things that came through and just wiped companies off the map because they lacked the skills at both operational and executive levels to make the change. The coming change that we're talking about is that we're looking for right now is the metaverse, which has every possibility of being just as disruptive as the internet wave was, if not more so, because unlike the internet, where you're taking the real world and digitizing it and leaving it in digital form, in the metaverse, you're taking the real world, you're duplicating it in all its glory, including physics, and creating a digital twin of the world. And with that digital twin, you can do things like model and create simulations that you can't do as cost effectively in the real world. And so you're going to see the companies that get this rapidly outstrip the companies that don't. As far as what you can do, there are a variety of things. You can bring up your own schools, as I mentioned, like the Networking Academy over at Cisco, or you can buy a school, which is what Lenovo did with Land School. They bought an online school organization, and that proved very timely because the schools that they were serving with Land School were able to pivot much more rapidly to the pandemic world than the schools that were not. And so that particular capability not only enhanced their ability to penetrate education and create better students that become better employees, but also allowed them to better sell into the school vertical. So it had a double positive impact. The underlying things that you need to develop if you're going to do something like this is really have an awful lot to do with metrics. You have to be able to instrument the students so that you know how well they're performing, because you can't observe them personally. It's very different when you've got kids, even young adults that are remote, versus kids and young adults that are in a classroom. You can't watch them. You can't tell when you've lost their attention. You can't tell when their minds have wandered off someplace else, and unless you're metering them and monitoring them, and that monitoring is key to being able to figure out which class material is taking, which class material is not, and altering the curriculum dynamically based on the dynamics of the class that you have, thus optimizing the overall experience for the class, and not doing what schools typically do, which is force down a curriculum that is fairly generic and probably has little to do with the students and where they currently are. And so that's all part of doing this right. The next generation of e-learning tools will undoubtedly have an increasing level of AI in it. We continue across the world to underfund education and underfund teachers. You can overcome that with technology. A conversational AI in particular could undoubtedly step in and supplement teachers at scale at a lower cost and therefore get the kids better trained at the budget levels we have, though ideally increasing those budget levels would undoubtedly be a better path. We have to deal with the practicalities of the budgets we have, not the wish of the budgets we'd like to have. And so the end result is technology is a force multiplier, and applied properly, it can take a smaller budget and do more with it than a non-technical approach. But to do that, you need to have the skills surrounding the technology. It's a dual-edged sword. Done badly, technology can also do a lot of damage in a very short period of time. And so you need those core skills in your education staff. Otherwise, if you try to do technology, there's a better chance you're going to make things worse than you are going to make things better. So overall, it comes down to a plan. Figure out what it is you want to do, where your exposures are, and then expend smartly against that plan and those exposures. So by the time you need the people to make the pivot, those people are available and they've been interns and you've locked them into careers in your company. Otherwise, those folks are going to go someplace else and you'll watch your competitors advance. And rather than being the new Google, you'll be the new Netscape. Take care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your excellent analysis, Mr. Adam. How do you want to analyze today's topic, and if you want to bring some sort of like innovations in the education industry? Even we are also discussing on the e-business, so you can add some different strategy.
Yeah, the topic about innovation. Yeah, well, I think we are in the middle of an innovative age right now. I think potential for the devices that we all use have potential for some amazing things to happen very soon. One thing I find really fascinating about modern culture in particular is screen media consumption, for example, and that is a phenomenon that is really interesting to me. I support research as part of our modern technological environment, because obviously e-learning and e-education will be conducted both by teachers and the pupils on both sides as they sit or stand or walk even in front of screens, looking at screens, consuming what is being shown on screens and using them to interact with colleagues, pupils, teachers, heads of department, principals, and so on. We have already witnessed e-education and e-learning gain traction since early 2000s, and now it is gaining even more traction now that the devices become smaller and more portable, as well as more capable. These devices are becoming, we've seen become smaller and more versatile along with the decrease in size, like a Swiss Army knife. But I have personal experiences using these devices to learn, and I'm always amazed, blown away at how much I have accomplished in my personal, educational, creative life with the help of portable tech. I have wrapped up projects on a train, on a bus, on lunch breaks in libraries, which is something I'm very grateful for ever since I graduated from big, bulky PCs, cell phones just used for text and calls, towards smartphones and iPhones. I think it is interesting that we all still call these devices phones, since phone communication has now become just one capability in a whole arsenal of different capabilities, powerful attributes. And now smartphones are no longer considered to be luxury items anymore. Literally, nearly everyone owns one. You could walk around, I think, my experience, areas that are considered unsafe, and not have your smartphone stolen, because there would be no point. Nearly everyone from across all the social strata possessed one or two, three, or more. So only a decade ago it was risky, or maybe even less than that, but not so much now for this reason. So these devices have an equalizing, leveling effect on lots of things, including for educational opportunities, access to educational resources, where people from all social strata can study what they want to study, and it would no longer be a pipe dream for them. Thus, it might not be long until we start witnessing an intelligence explosion and the development of a knowledge-based economy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Donald, how do you want to analyze today's topic? Especially we do discuss on e-business as well as e-education. Yes. Can you unmute, please?
Look, we've been talking about e-education, and so I'm going to start there and then segue into e-business. Right now in the United States, the people who are traditionally behind, and that would be African Americans, Hispanics, the people of lower income, basically lower income whites, the people who live in Appalachia and other places where they're traditionally poor, are falling farther behind. They've always been behind if you test their test scores, but now they're falling farther behind, much farther behind. They're like, because of COVID, because they're tasked with learning themselves at home, and that's very, very difficult. If you have a strong family structure of parents who believe that you're supposed to be able to, that learning is important, they'll sit you down in front of the device and make you sit there and actually do the work. But without that structure, people don't do it. And I think that having been developing classes, online classes, since the late 80s was when I started doing it. At Hewlett Packard, we had internal, very high-speed phone lines, so we could do it there. It was before, in the late 80s, that was really before the internet, but we had sort of our own internal internet. And to make a class interesting is so much work that we figure that it takes about at least 1 hour per day, and probably more, a lot more than that for a class. And what winds up happening is that things change so fast, you're constantly having to make new classes. So there's this whole infrastructure of people within an organization like Hewlett Packard that's just constantly making new classes because there's new stuff coming out. I did that at NetApp too. And so I think it's useful to realize that making courses is a lot more difficult and time consuming than you think, even if the tools are good. But right now the tools are so primitive that it's overwhelmingly difficult to do this right now. So it's going to be a while before that this really starts to happen. And it's one of those things that's starting to separate the haves from the have-nots, because if you don't have internet access, you can't do it. And it's something that I've been saying before. When you start looking at metrics, what kind of metrics are you going to use? How well does the person read? How well is the person doing on math scores? Various kinds of metrics like that, which are, reasonable. You've got to have some sort of metrics. But what's going to wind up happening is you're going to start using artificial intelligence, quote, artificial intelligence, which is just multiple nonlinear regressions running at the same time. So it's just a statistical normative statistics, and you're going to start pushing people into some sort of norms. And who decides the norms, and how flexible are those norms? Because if you're training people to do a certain task at a certain period of time, that task is going to possibly, almost for sure, become obsolete very quickly. For instance, if you teach somebody to be a great Java programmer, then in a couple of years everybody's using Rust, and they need to adapt, which is fine. But the point of, but somebody's going to have to redo all of those classes and make sure that there's some sort of an ability to change them. And somehow there's going to have to be the opportunity for the people who don't have internet and all of that to be able to be trained in a similar kind of way. So it's a much larger issue than just the technical issue. On the other hand, when you get into something like e-business, the phone has been a miracle. I mean, the whole thing of M-Pesa is the ability to transfer money instantly from one part of the country to the other. Started in Kenya, and it was started by phone companies, where you could basically buy phone credit and then give the phone credit to somebody else and then cash in the phone credit. And that was a way of transferring money from one place to another. People have been selling time on cell phones. They've been taking solar chargers and charging cell phones. I mean, the basically possibilities of e-business just using our mobile devices is something that we can't on this show just even begin to imagine all of the things that people are doing all over the world with them. And I just want to kind of point out the kind of pessimistic view of e-education, and then but then a very optimistic view of both e-business and e-education too. I'm sure that there'll be ways that mobile devices are used to help educate people that I don't even imagine right now. So that's what I'm going to say right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, we are actually like moving with a new world, I want to say, because I think the world never see that kind of challenges. Even at present situation, Asia Pacific, we have major challenges with the COVID-19 increasing very fast. Many people died. I think young generation, they have to take the responsibility more for the upcoming worlds. That is the reality. Yes, definitely the community, especially the uh, most of the talented communities and those who have a lot of experience like you people, you can guide us in that situations when we discussing about economical sustainabilities. And because at present economy has lot of challenges, many people lose their job, many business actually losing. But great thing is that internet online business and technology oriented business growing very fast. So what is your advice, what type of strategy we can develop for new human resource development, or what Professor Rob said for our business? And second things, how we can generate a business through this e-business process.
Yeah, all very good questions and right in line with what I wanted to talk about. Yes, there are plenty of challenges, and taking responsibility clearly is the way to address those challenges. For example, like Donald was talking about the issue with developing courses and online courses. And he's done much more of that than I have, but I've done my fair share as well. And I completely agree about the amount of time and effort that it takes to develop these. One of the things that I've come across, and I'm going to put this in the private chat here,
Mhm.
is something called OER Commons, Open Education Resources. And this can be quite valuable. These are all Creative Commons license courses or something that is similar. So if you need to develop something, say that you, Sharif, wanted to develop something to answer the problems that you posed to me in that question, you want to develop this for Malaysia, this is a good source to start with as far as being able to take courses that have been developed and then put out with a Creative Commons license so that other people can use those courses. There's absolutely no charge for this. And I've gone through and played with it. I will say that I have not used any of these courses in what I'm doing, but some of the courses that I'm developing for my tutoring business, I'll put them up there and see if they can be of help to anyone else. So this is an area where the internet can bring people together and to share. And I think it helps keep that human element in the technology element at the same time, because it's we humans that are deciding what to develop and deciding how to administer this. Now, I realize that going forward with AI and AR environments, this will all change. And I look forward to doing my best to guide that in the directions that I think that it needs to go. So I think that helps from um, an economic point of view. Obviously, it helps being able to spread good, reliable, well-developed information. And being able to do this online addresses what you talked about with the COVID, for example, or any emergency that comes. This is one of the trends that I see both in online education and online businesses, looking at how to be more resilient to things that are around us. Some schools had to hastily try to find a way to educate their students when they couldn't do in-class learning. Businesses, of course, shut down and then tried to find ways to be able to reach out to maybe their current customers and others. So that's a reactive approach. So a proactive approach is to build this into education and build this into your business model. You can be a brick and mortar business model and still have an online presence. And that's becoming easier to do with marketplaces. I neglected to say in my opening remarks that I've worked as at the corporate officer level in a couple of businesses, the vice president with a fancy title in two different technology firms. And we primarily, even though being technology firms, still did our marketing and our servicing and delivery of our product in the old school physical way. And now those businesses have moved to a hybrid model of both in person and online to keep and hold their customers and attract new customers. I've also played with, I became a partner in a small business that markets products online. And we do this exclusively online. And we started out with our own website and determined that to keep up with the technology that's being developed for selling online, we decided to join established marketplaces, which can then build in the analytics and can build in uh, AI assistance to help customers go through our online store and suggest to them things that, based on what you bought before, you might want to buy this now. And we're going to see that AI and that AR influence also in education. Some of these classes that I was taking is I meet with my professor online and we discuss the course, and we can do this group or individual. And people that are attending this course are all over the country. And but yet, when I get into the course material, much of that is directed then programmatically. So there's a hybrid, there's a combination there. And this is more resilient than just strictly a brick and mortar university, just as building in that kind of technology and business is more resilient for them as well, than just brick and mortar. So I think we can address economic issues in part. I think we can address the resiliency in part. But it goes back to what you said, Sharif, about taking responsibility for the environment that we find ourselves in and using technology appropriately to be able to adapt to that. And I found over the course of COVID-19 that I myself, with my tutoring business, became much more comfortable about doing my tutoring, which I thought was a very personal thing, and being able to do that online, and that I could reach so many more people. So convenience, lower cost, flexibility, both of those are advantages for both e-business and online. I want to stop and let some others have something to say, but then the mobile aspect of all of this comes into line, and then the back end analytics come into line. There's much to say here, but I'm a positive kind of guy, and I see that applying technology in the appropriate way can provide us the kind of future direction that we want to go.
Thank you. You
Thank you.
bring
You bring
excellent point.
excellent point.
This is,
This is,
sorry.
sorry.
Uh, you, this is really important point because we can integrate AI in education system. But even long time I try to share even the transhumanist party with the AI experts and many more people, because trust me, because I am from a developing nation, I can understand your views and everything. But I always say, what is the preparations of the local community? Let's say South Asia, we are talking too much about India. Most of the IT companies top CEO from India. But I'm just sharing one of the interesting report from World Economy Forum, the preparedness of automations. Uh, Definitely, I think you can give us a very good guideline on that particular points, like preparedness for automations in APEC, Asia Pacific regions, in year 2021. Today, it's published in World Economy Forum. Can you see it? Yes. From there, you can see the best possible, like good preparations actually taken by Australia. It's a 72%. Then Singapore, 40%. Japan, 69%. South Korea, 66%. Thailand, 61%. Philippines, 56%. India, that is the very interesting area, because most of the IT company CEO from India. India preparations is 44%, Pakistan 40%, Bangladesh, I want to say less than that. And definitely the South Asia, their preparation is not good for AI automations and this thing. That is the practical things always I try to discuss with our speakers, with our AI expert, with our people, that the real scenario is real industry is completely different. Because if we do not have enough internet connections, if we do not have enough infrastructures, yes, USA definitely the best place for integrated. Even Singapore, only 7% preparations they have. How practically we can implement this e-educations and e-business, this AI and automations and this kind of things in our industry, in our business, as well as in our education. Professor Rob, you are expert, you have a huge experience from the big companies. What is your analysis?
Well, I'll start off by saying you're starting at the wrong end. You never approach a problem leading with the tools. You approach a problem by defining the problem, and then you select the tools that best will correct the problem, will solve the problem. Expect the reason why automation is down in places like Pakistan and India is because those are relatively dense environments with regard to population, and the government there is more interested in keeping as many people as possible working, so they don't have a revolt. And automation in its early phases tends to put people out of work, and particularly it can have an impact on assembly line jobs, jobs where you employ a lot of people in roles that are better done by machines. Now, my own personal feeling is that that's backwards thinking. If you have people doing jobs that should better be done by machines, then that's probably an industry that shouldn't be in the country. If your problem is underemployment, you should be picking industries that provide more jobs over those that do not. In other areas like Australia, where the population density is far less, then automation makes a ton of sense because you can get to scale and use automation to get around labor shortages, which is how automation should be used. Automation should be used at first to get around labor shortages, and then for maximizing production and creating efficiencies. But as if you do it backwards or wrong, you're going to get large areas of unemployment, and then that looks at large areas of unemployment will cause disruption, revolts, and wars over resources. And so you have to, as a government, you have to look at the long-term economic and social impact of the programs that you're implementing, and if you're a country in this particular phase, you should be not looking to emulate what the developed countries are doing. You should be looking to work in areas where they are not, areas that are under development, areas where you can come up and lead. Using Japan as an example, after the Second World War, they identified consumer electronics as an area where they thought they could lead. The U.S. market was largely run by RCA, which it dominated, but also restricted innovation as a result. And in combination with the U.S. government, which crippled RCA, we're very good at shooting ourselves in the foot. Japan was able to take over the consumer electronics market from a much more powerful developed country over a period of about a decade. But that meant they had to think strategically. They did the same thing with automotive. They hit the U.S. where it was weak. They didn't go after the U.S. where it was strong, and they were very successful. The United States didn't even see them coming. In fact, the United States auto industry actually helped launch the Japanese auto industry, and they did a better job learning what it was we taught them than we did understanding what it was we taught. And that's the kind of dynamic you want to catch. You want to develop. You want to look for where the industry isn't, not where it is. You want to look at the weaknesses in the developed countries and fill those weaknesses. And you'll find that the developed countries will largely work with you if you do it that way, because they won't view you as a competitor until it is way the heck too late. And by the way, I'm not advocating that developed countries not help out here, because that is also an important way to fill technology gaps. What I'm pointing out, though, on both sides is in developed countries, they have to be aware of their own gaps and aware of the growing threat that's going to come up if you allow another entity and another country to fill a critical part of the ecosystem that you're not willing to fill, and then expand out of that to a complete solution. You have to build partnerships that last, so that both sides see the value of the partnership, and the partnership is sustained so that neither side renders the other side obsolete. It's got to be a long-lasting strategic relationship. Otherwise, it's going to be tactical, and one side or the other is going to get hurt. And that's an unoptimized dynamic. So at the end, strategic thinking, go where the industry isn't. Know what your strengths and weaknesses are. A lot of industries depend heavily on a value chain, both sales and logistics. And certain countries are going to be physically, geographically uncompetitive to that value chain. Well, that's an industry that you don't go into then. If you want to find industries where your location, your natural resources, your capabilities have natural advantages. And so when you hit the market, you've got it's not just a beachhead that you're going to lose against a more powerful competitor. It's a beachhead you can grow and expand into a market that you can sustain. I think Singapore is probably an excellent example of a country that does this right. Other countries, not so much. So in the end, look at countries that do things the way that really benefit their citizens, emulate them, apply technology to solve the problems your country has, and the technology follows the problem, doesn't lead the problem, and don't go into areas where your country is geographically or physically unable to develop a competitive advantage. It's simply not going to end well. And finally, going back to e-business, recognize that Amazon, the most powerful retailer in the market, should have been Sears. The Sears did a large catalog company, massively dominant up through the 50s and 60s, going back to the I believe the 1930s. And they simply didn't make the pivot. The pivot would simply have been putting the Sears catalog online and providing tools that people could buy instantly, as opposed to having to use a mail order. But they'd collapsed the catalog sales division by the time the internet came around. They were not able to pivot, and the end result is the market went someplace else. IBM versus AWS, same kind of problem. The IBM's mainframe technology was ideal for cloud. The entire ecosystem was perfectly tuned to make their cloud effort not only successful but dominant. But they backed away from mainframes. They backed away from the ecosystem, and by the time the market came back around, they found themselves out of place for the next market pivot. You have to anticipate these pivots. Otherwise, you can get an industry and lose it. And for an emerging economy, that means these big guys, they are vulnerable and they don't see it coming. And it's a repetitive problem. So you can get there first. You can outgrow them. And as I mentioned earlier, the next big pivot is the metaverse. And if you folks aren't really developing skills in that area, then the markets that are going to win. One final comment. Right now with the job shortages, Silicon Valley is currently outperforming the world in terms of filling job shortages. It's kind of a phenomenon. We didn't think this was going to happen, and the way they're doing it is they've completely pivoted to flexible recruiting and flexible employment, which means you can live any place you want in most of these companies and work for the companies. And what they're finding is now if you could work for Intel and you can live in a location where houses cost under $100,000, why not do that? Even though you won't make as much as, say, somebody living in Silicon Valley, the disparity between your cost and income are massively larger in an area where the cost of living is lower. And so people are finding they can go to these areas that are better for kids, have better schools, lower costs, still have a very high paying job, and the local industries can't compete because they can't afford to pay those same wages. And so Silicon Valley is just chewing up a whole bunch of resources now all over the world because they figured out that in this new world you can live any place and do a job, and they've accepted it. Those are the kinds of things you don't miss. If you're one is you can certainly say, well, if that's the need, maybe what we do is we become the best place to live for all these people, and all these employees come here, and then we later make use of these employees because they're all in country. That would be a strategy. But you need to look at the way the world is and the way where the world is going, and develop your strategy against those conditions so when the world arrives, you're right there with it.
Thank you. Mr. Adam, how do you want to add? I think this is excellent analysis we get from Professor Rob. Mr. Adam.
Oh, thank you. I had some thoughts about automation when Rob mentioned automation. I'll get onto it in a bit. I just had a few more thoughts about the e-learning and e-education. I would just like to expand on some previous thoughts in order to think of strategies as per one of your questions, Sharif. So in my previous comment, I praised some of the positive attributes of screen media in sectors like we are discussing now, namely e-learning, e-education, e-business, and so on. I realized that I failed to expand on my first point concerning screen media effects, side effects, how it impacts the human organism, both physically and mentally. There are a few effects we should probably take into consideration. If anything has been debunked since I first heard about them or read about them, please forgive me and correct me. But firstly, there is the effect of screen media consumption, especially passive screen media consumption, or consumptive screen interaction and utilization, where after prolonged use, the sections of the brain housing our abilities are responsible for abilities for higher order mental faculties could be affected and start to atrophy, like we can see in the brains or brain scans rather of addicts, whatever the addiction might be, as it is no longer too much of a stretch to address screen media consumption as an addiction these days. So that leads us on to the question where we can ask ourselves, does e-education and e-learning courses and packages count as passive screen media? And we must be specific here, hence why I ask, is remote online learning a form of passive screen media? Well, no, not to me. I don't think so, because education and learning are not passive. It's a screen media phenomenon, but it isn't passive. It's interactive, proactive, full of thinking and doing and problem solving. So that surely would be protective against such deleterious neurological decay, if I may use such a word. So are there other side effects we should be aware of and warn ourselves about, regardless of how passive or interactive our online learning activities may be, or any computer device facilitated activity for that matter? Well, physically, yes, certainly. We need to be in good physical shape because an acceptable level of physical health would help facilitate a healthy mind too, namely memory retention, recall, neuroplasticity. Thus, both groups of people on either side of the education pipeline, namely students, pupils, over to teachers and tutors, should be mindful that they are taking regular breaks away from what it is they are doing, protect their sight to exercise, keep circulation well oiled, especially now where we are witnessing an obesity problem, which is a health issue that seems to get the most attention where modern lifestyles and our alleged sedentary lifestyles are concerned. Furthermore, we need to remember to keep checking in with pupils who have signed up to e-learning and e-education courses, that they are not withdrawing into social isolation. If we consider homeschooling, for example, one of the obvious advantages of homeschooling over traditional schooling is that bullying is mercifully spared for the homeschooled pupil. However, even in homeschooling, there is some face-to-face communication between people with a shared physical space and close proximity. And remote digital learning online risks losing even that as a pro if we are to compare pros and cons. And sure, we see the faces over Zoom or hear the voices over phone call, where the same pleasantries are exchanged as if they were in the same room. But it's just a hollow simulation, an imitation of real social contact. And social contact is important in pupils with regards to their confidence, self-esteem, character building. And if all that is taken away, maybe the motivation to do the best they might want to do in education might be affected as well. Thus, they retreat into themselves, like we see in Japan and Korea, South Korea. And yeah, with automation, it made me think if automation becomes more widespread, does that allow us to have more time to devote to personal development, or will society go the way of the mouse utopia experiment and collapse in the final stage of like hedonism and debauchery? So, yeah, it'll be an interesting future to observe in the coming years. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor Donald. I want to learn one of the point, because yes, we are moving with e-education, e-business. Example from my personal experience, like I can remember from my school, actually what I learned. Actually, I learned leadership. I learned how to communicate with the people, like regular schools. I learned how to make a team. Even many complex problem, how I can solve. Even I can remember the Nobel Prize winners was Rabindranath Tagore. So I can remember one day with all of my friends, we do not go to school. We visited his place, and this place was so creative, and we enjoyed a lot, and we learned a lot from Rabindranath Kutivari. We said he had special houses, and he had all of the creative design, his write-ups. It's near my place in Bangladesh, like 3 hours of drive, but we enjoy a lot. Yes, that day we miss the schools, but we learn how to be creative, how to be productive, how to be so innovative. I'm very honest with you, at present generations, I miss even the developing nations, that kind of innovative peoples. So do you think we're more engaged with technology, but we are losing our innovations, our creativities, our like teamwork, and many things we are losing? I don't know. It's one of my hypotheses, but all of the speaker can discuss.
I think there's some evidence to that. I think it's something definitely worth researching more, because ancillary research has shown that that's true. I mean, I love the story that you're telling me. That at Stanford, there's a professor, Jim March, and if you've ever read like business books, I mean, if you read Michael Porter or anybody like that, he's in the footnotes somewhere, because he and Herbert Simon wrote the first book on organizations. And Jim March was an emeritus professor in 5 subjects at Stanford. I mean, the guy is brilliant. And every year he'd have what he called the Marchian Festival. And he and a bunch of graduate students would go out to Angel Island in the San Francisco Bay and have a picnic. And one day they invited me, and I spent 2 hours one-on-one talking with Jim March, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I learned so much from that guy. It was mind-boggling. And opportunities like that are just golden. I've been lucky enough to have long conversations with Harrison White, Mark Granovetter, and Jim March, and all these wonderful people. And so it's, when you really think about it, what do you know that you haven't learned from other people? I mean, what do you really? I mean, sure, sometimes, you learn a lot from books, but somebody wrote the book. And a lot of times somebody can explain to you everything that's in a book in 20 minutes, because somebody that wrote the book just understands things so well and so clearly that they can just kind of just transfer the knowledge to your head. And I found that to be true in many times in my life. I think that what Adam said is so important, because I do know that there's research that shows that if you're not socially connected, there's a gene in your immune system that stops working. It just stops working, and your immune system stops working, and you die. And taken to be the explanation of why so many men die so quickly after they retire, because women develop a social structure that's outside of their work usually, because they're responsible for childcare, and through the child they develop social networks that are outside of their work life, whereas men traditionally don't do that. And their social networks are developed through their work life. And then when they retire, they lose those social networks. And then that just has such an impact on their health that it literally kills them. And that's the importance of our our relationships with other people is just, beyond what we even know. And human beings are prediction machines. What we do in our brains is our brains like figure out what's going to be happening around us, and what our sensual experience is that that stuff that we figured out. And how do we make those predictions? Well, we don't completely know, but a lot of it has to do with what we've learned from the people around us. So it's not just stuff you learn in books, but it's stuff that you're learning about how to communicate, how to get along. How can you be a leader unless you have people to lead? They've shown that people in work situations that go into the office get promoted faster than people that don't go in the office. I mean, I've worked at home on and off since the 80s. And I'll tell you what happens is if you work at home all the time, you start getting paranoid. Because how do we know what other people are thinking? You just have to imagine it. I mean, I have to imagine what every one of you is thinking, because I can't get in your heads. There's no miracle way that I could put electrodes on you or psychically read your minds. So what happens if we're separated from each other? We're separated from each other, then I don't have your feedback of your faces and other things like that. And so I just get paranoid. And so I agree with Sharif so incredibly much that we have to have that one-on-one component. And I don't think that, a science fiction book like Snow Crash and the Metaverse is going to actually really happen anytime soon. And that's my opinion.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to share this Rabindranath Kuthibari. It's near my place where I born, and I can remember not only me, my friends, and we are actually we are too much of inspired by this Rabindranath Kuthibari. It's a small places, but so creative, so so I'm just trying to share these things, and it's just I'm just sharing that. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is the Kuthibari of Rabindranath Tagore, who win Nobel Prize and many interesting innovations, like all of his like poetries, her design, and everything in the wall of this building. And I can see through this process.
Sharif, you're cutting out really badly.
Yeah, it froze a bit.
So, Sharif.
Oh, speaking of freezing.
David, I think you're up next. You're muted.
Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and talk a little bit, especially after getting off mute, and at least until Sharif comes back, and maybe a little bit longer. I want to hear more about that picture. But where I wanted to go with following the discussion is, well, a couple of places. I really think it's important that we identify and follow the trends. And if you search out on the internet, you're going to find a lot of different opinions about what the trends are and where they're going. But some ones that, at least that I'm buying into, is the idea of micro learning in education. I grew up taking, courses that would, go 13 weeks, and then you get a grade, and then you go another 13 weeks and get a grade, and you work towards some type of certificate or some type of degree. But I think it was Rob that brought up, the industry certification and industry training and buying, online learning sessions and so forth. With the cycle of education, with the cycle of technology accelerating and going faster and faster, you don't have time to take 2 years, 4 years, or more to say, okay, now I'm ready to go do this. With the technological cycle at 18 to 24 months, it needs to be much quicker. So you can, as a company, train your people in specifics and move on. And I think that's also something that, we that want education can do, is we can pick from this micro learning that's tailored to individuals to then go and do tasks. And those tasks don't have to be repetitive tasks. They can be tasks like learning how to build a team, like how to form a small business, how to market effectively with the tools that we have today. And that leads into the next part of the trends. Obviously, we've seen what's gone on with smartphones, but there's been, that's part of a continuum. We started out with people that were learning in front of computers. And then from there, like the university courses that I'm taking, I can actually attend lectures, I can do coursework, and I can do that from my smartphone as well. It's across platforms. And business needs to do that as well, be able to sell across different platforms and have this common look and feel that identifies you and your business. So the fact that we're taking these things online, there's a lot of commonality between those. Another one of the commonalities is, how do you get paid? If you're providing education, how do you get paid? And so we have the common payment systems that are out there, but if you stop and think about that, over the last few years, that's changed a lot as well. Someone brought that up earlier in the conversation. But where is it going? So like Coinbase, which is cryptocurrency, is gearing up to being able to handle regular online transactions. There's other businesses that are doing that. And there'll probably be things beyond just cryptocurrency as new ways to get paid, especially as we move into micro learning and micro business transactions that require quick and efficient means of payment, whether it be subscription or whether it be one time. And as far as part of getting paid is, what do you charge? And in these increasingly shorter and shorter business cycles, I think we're going to see more of that done on a predictive pattern based on where you're selling, who you're selling to, and what your competition is. And dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is already available to sellers on Amazon and other marketplaces, where you can let them decide what the price should be today, or this hour, or in this area if you sell across different time zones and into different parts of the world. So following the trends is really, really important. And I've spoke for a while. I want to also maybe have an opportunity to talk about the issue on human social contact and technology. But for now, I'll pass the baton back to Sharif. Are you there, Sharif?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Professor Rob.
Yeah, it's important for the moderator to stay engaged. So anyway, one of the other online resources to point to, and I'll put it into chat, is the Khan Academy. If you haven't seen it, it's academy that was set up by an educator. It's all the content is free. They survive on donations. I just sent them $150 myself yesterday. Their latest offering, which is a Khan Academy for kids, starts for kids under kindergarten age. In other words, helping kids get ready for school. This stuff is all online, can be done on a tablet or smartphone, and it is designed to really help at a very low cost get kids ready for school, and at the different school ages and sections help kids develop predominantly STEM skills throughout education. The course material is largely game-based, so it's fun. If you go down and you read on the different courses and you read the feedback notes, you'll find that both parents of young children just rave about this stuff because the kids will play it for hours and actually learn things, and it helps condition their brains for education. And then when you get to the older classes, the students praise it because they're able to cover class material that they were struggling with before and focus on areas where they are weak without fear of being criticized. Now, Adam pointed out something that I'd like to correct, and that's that bullying does still exist with e-learning. Cyberbullying is a thing, and so you still have to protect against it. It's not the physical bullying that we get in schools, but we do have a cyberbullying problem. There is actually substantial course material on bullying, including cyberbullying, and of course every education institution should be up to speed on what happens, because if kids can do an awful lot of damage to the learning process if they're bullies, and certainly kids that are bullied can end up committing suicide or just simply be underperformers. It does them a substantial amount of damage. So it's a serious subject, and covering it regardless of the nature of education is very important. So back to the underlying topic. Donald said something I found was kind of funny, only because I've been in this industry for a long time, and we're kind of famous for CEOs saying things like, "Hey, the world's only going to ever need 3 computers. The internet's never going to go any place. It's going to fail. It's a flash in the pan. You name it. You can pick a technology that was wildly successful." That amazes me, going back to the folks that just hated on the iPhone when it came out. And sadly to say, I did a little bit myself at that time. But the folks that were running technology companies were outspoken about how the iPhone was never going to work. And even internally, not a lot of people know this, but there were internal groups in Microsoft creating the iPhone before there was an iPhone, and internal groups over at Research in Motion, now BlackBerry, that were doing the same things, and over at Palm, they're doing the same things, and they all got shouted down by executive management that said, "Yeah, nobody wants a phone that does entertainment. That's just stupid." And realized a good chunk of those companies have either exited the business or failed completely. So the reality is whether you believe in a technology change or not, they do happen, and the people that speak out against them when they happen actually become rather famous over time, or infamous, as the case may be. But the reason I bring up the metaverse is it's backed by Zuckerberg with relatively massive funding. NVIDIA. We've got SIGGRAPH coming up next week. If you get a chance to attend, that's probably the first big breakout show for the metaverse. Over 1,000 developers, several hundred companies, all focus on this. And the skills that you're going to need here, much like we needed website creation skills at the beginning of the internet, are going to be skills needed to scan in or convert plans into 3D objects. We actually have our own version of HTML now for the metaverse. Is one of the things we were waiting for, a cross-compatible standard that allows you to build objects that will transcend environments. And of course, NVIDIA's brought forth their Omniverse concept, which is a building framework for the metaverse. But what we're going to see over the next couple of decades is the massive amount of effort that's going in. We've got several large teams now basically digitizing the world. But we're way short in terms of the resources that are needed. Much like the beginning of the internet, we didn't have enough resources to build the web pages or the engines that we needed at the beginning. And of course, arguably the company helped drive that initial founding Netscape, they didn't benefit from it because they didn't realize that it wasn't just the browser, it was the cloud that you needed to have to actually monetize this beast. And so they created something that Google eventually took and made an even more powerful company out of. So it also can showcase that sometimes the first adopters of these technologies aren't the ones that end up at the back end either. It's the ones that figure out how to monetize this stuff, like the Facebooks and Googles of the world, that make a difference, and not the ones that create the browser that we wouldn't be where we are now if we didn't have. But Netscape is gone, and Google and Facebook, for good or ill, and then we can probably argue whether it's good or ill for a while, are the dominant players. But it's coming, and as I say, it's a case though of making sure that in country, before a pivot like this happens, you've already developed the skills. You know where your competencies lie, and you know how you're going to play in the ecosystem. And it's certainly fair to say maybe this ecosystem doesn't appeal to you, or doesn't work with regard to your geography. But the nice thing about digital technology, internet-like technology, is it is not geographic specific. It is the kind of industry that can easily move from location to location, unlike manufacturing, which has huge logistics power and value chain issues that you have to deal with that are geographically oriented. So the good news is we are moving to a period of time when countries that are not geographically well suited for manufacturing can compete, because the electronic world is at least for now non-geographic centric. And as we are discovering, you can pretty much work any place, live any place, and work any place, and those two things don't have to be the same place.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Rob mentioned about erroneous forecasting, and it just reminds me of my father. He loves retelling the anecdote about naysayers predicting quite erroneously that people will definitely not need a computer at home. Who wants a personal computer? That's ridiculous. And of course, the rest is history. And it seems that some futurologists are quite bad at forecasting. I call it the Kurzweil effect. Changing the goalposts all the time, from singularities by 2020 to chips in our brains at 2060, and so on and on. But never mind. Yeah, thanks again to Mr. Rob for the correction. Yes, cyberbullying certainly in many ways can be more devastating than its real life counterpart, fortunately. So yeah, that's definitely something to be aware of. So I'm curious to see whether e-learning will help facilitate a return to polymathism, a kind of new Renaissance man or Renaissance woman, where a new generation of autodidactic polymaths that we saw in flourishing historical periods like the Enlightenment, which fell to increasing specialization, as we have seen in the past couple of decades. So maybe with this access to more information, knowledge, and wisdom than ever before, hopefully this kind of archetype may return, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donald.
Well, I'm not saying that something like the metaverse will never happen, but I think that when you're looking at the kind of people that we're talking about that don't have internet access and don't have power, I don't think it's a very viable solution. I'd want to point out that Google has done quite a few failed projects. There was a time that they were going to control the energy industry, so they built a town basically as in conjunction with General Electric back in New York. Literally, it was a huge venture where they were making smart meters and other kinds of tools like that, so that they could control the new grid, and that completely flopped at huge expense. So it's just because Google or Facebook is involved in something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work.
That's true. Though be aware that Google's got an inherent problem. They're like a 4-year-old on sugar. They don't have any attention span. So they've burned through robotics, drones, you name it. It's just a company that they don't stick with anything long enough. We'll see what they do with the quantum, but they just have a history of going into stuff, playing with it for a while, losing interest and exiting. Facebook stuck with stuff a lot more. Oculus is a good example. It now dominates the VR segment, and a lot of folks didn't think they were going to be successful there. So yeah, but you're right. Google sucks.
So these things are like for instance, right now, if I want to make a simple quiz that the choices are audio. So for instance, I work with language students, and it's an interesting thing. The Japanese students, if I say you should stop at the light, you should stop at the right, they can't hear the difference. So I give them the two sentences. You should stop at the light, you should stop at the right. And I wanted to create exercises where they had the choice of doing one or the other. So you could do this, select A or select B. And I could not find any software that worked on the web to do that. And in order to do it, what I had to do is download every single solitary web quiz thing that I could possibly find, and they cost money, and it took me weeks and to determine that there was nothing that would actually work. And so the state we're in right now for e-learning has a long way to go. I mean, because I do it all the time, and it's very, very possible that in the future people are going to have more interest in this, and there's going to be more things available. But I want to point out that when the internet was going, it was limping along, and nobody was particularly interested in it until they started to get enough bandwidth. I mean, that was really one of the problems. You downloaded a picture, you waited like 5 minutes before the picture was on your computer, but the bandwidth increased and increased so you could download a picture. And what were 80% of the pictures that people downloaded? This is a quiz. They were porn. And historically, porn has driven lots of industries, like VCRs. No one really cared about them until they started putting porn on them. And so they started selling like hotcakes. So I think that once they have some good porn for the metaverse, then it'll probably start taking off. But until then, we're just going to have to wait. But when you think about it, the bandwidth that it's going to take is phenomenal. And I, in this particular case, I respectfully disagree with Rob about the infrastructure. Because in the United States, after World War II, Eisenhower had seen the freeway system in Germany, and he was in awe of it. It was so much better than we had in the United States. He pushed through funding to build the freeway system in the United States. And the freeway system actually created a lot, because when the infrastructure is there, it gives entrepreneurs all these different ideas of ways that they can use it. And I think that for developing countries, having the infrastructure to actually be able to do e-learning and e-business is critical. And it's from that famous movie. There's a line: "If you build it, they will come." And the kind of things that entrepreneurs can do in Bangladesh or developing countries are things we probably are irrelevant to us in the United States. We couldn't really think of them because they're not things that we would have any need to do. So I think that really has to be the priority. We can't really do e-learning and e-business without the E to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor.
By the way, I don't disagree with that. We're not at cross purposes there. That's I was talking manufacturing infrastructure, not internet.
Thank you. This is really nice discussions, and I'm sure our audience really enjoyed today's session. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. Before that, I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your policymaker, with your government, with your corporations and academia. So hopefully with this kind of open dialogue, we can learn from each others and we can grow a sustainable economy. And this will be very effective and helpful for developing nations. With the help of developed nations, hopefully we can minimize the gap in the future. Thank you for joining today's session. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. First, Professor David Schumacher, then Professor Rob, then Mr. Adam, and finally Professor Donald. Professor David Schumacher, what's the concluding remarks today?
Yes, boy, I think I say this every time, but this one's really true, I guess, as all the others are. Great show, great interchange of ideas here, and I really, really appreciate that. Where I want to go with my concluding remarks is along the idea of technology and human contact. That was something that I believe Adam originally introduced into the conversation, and I think it's very, very important because I myself can become enamored with the technologies and forget the human side of things. I've seen that with people that get involved in video games and so forth and so on. So I think there is an interest in the tech community, in the business community that's developing tech and wanting to use the tech for their own businesses to keep the human contact in there. An example of that is I'm in a university study right now that's got a very fancy name, but the whole idea is they're looking at how to keep human contact in online learning and how to translate that into the workers of the future working online from, as somebody said, anywhere in the world doing a particular job. How do you maintain that human contact? I volunteered for the study because I thought it would be interesting, and so far it has. Some of the things that it's talking about are the use of collaboration tools. How do you do that in this online format to collaborate with fellow students, to go spend time in the library and not just read books, but how do you get the social experience of the library? If you're working from home, how do you maintain the social experience in the workplace? So the university that I'm also a student at builds in some of these tools. I'm starting to see businesses now building in tools to allow discussion that feels very human-like or is human-like, and to be able to maintain that experience so that learning doesn't degrade, and that businesses that do this better than the next business are going to have a competitive advantage. So there's monetary reason for this. So currently today, what we have are the tools that businesses are developing and universities are developing. But then for you and I out there, there's other tools like in the Transhumanist Party, we do a lot of our work through tools like Slack because we're all over the country and all over the world. These tools get better and better and better to where you can have private sessions, private discussions, public discussions, and emulate the type of things that we do when we have physical contact. Where will the next breakthroughs in that come from? I'm glad that Donald brought up Eisenhower and the freeway system because I was just reading about that the other day. And if you look at the freeway system, at least the initial freeway system and where it's been built out to, there is a military base at a lot of these intersection points. Or there was a military base or a logistics depot or something along that line. So there was a military component to being able to move materials and troops and so forth very quickly. Now, the internet, the freeway system is much bigger than that. And entrepreneurs took advantage of it and ran with it. So maybe some of the collaboration tools and so forth that we're going to see are going to come from places that we don't think of. Maybe they will come from a business that develops it. If Google can maintain its focus long enough, maybe it'll develop something that works really well that way and sell it, or Facebook will, but maybe it will come out of DARPA or some other place like that where the internet came from and was developed. And you can make a parallel between the freeway system and the internet if you wish. And I think that's continuing. So a wonderful discussion today. Boy, we need another discussion on this at some point in the future. Thanks for inviting me, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Professor Rob.
All right, so really where we should think about starting any effort like this in a country is probably a SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And as a country, as an education system, as a company, you have those. And once you can define your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you can set in place a strategy to take advantage of your strengths, overcome your weaknesses, prepare for the opportunities, and make damn sure you're ready for the threats. But we so often focus on technology as an endpoint, and technology is a tool to get to an endpoint, and to get to understand that endpoint is critically important, because if you don't know what the goal is, you're probably not going to get there. Kind of sort of quoting an ex-baseball coach, but the Yogi Berra. But the end, the first step is really to understand where it is you need to go, and then apply whatever tools are necessary in order to get there. If you've got a programmatic approach to the problem, you can solve it. If you don't, you won't. And governments traditionally have a nasty problem of going out running in every direction they can think of and not really getting a whole heck of a lot done as a result. So if you if you can develop a priority list of the things that are most critical to get done, and then you can resource those priorities in order, there's a good chance you'll get that priority list accomplished. And obviously you won't if you don't. So the goal here, if you're trying to get people educated, if you're trying to prepare for the future, trying to prepare to ride the next wave and not be hit by it, you really need a strategic plan, and that probably should be your first major step. And then we can talk about technologies, we can talk about approaches, we can talk about best practices in order to get there. But without a strategic goal, we're just thrashing.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sri. When Mr. Donald was speaking about pornography, it made me remember about reading that phenomenon for myself. I forget where and when exactly, where pornography helped facilitate new media and to help new media secure their popularization from VHS to the internet. So, which reminded me of something that I thought about regarding the subject of e-learning that I forgot to raise until now, which is the issue of focus and discipline and distractibility. We want e-learning pupils to do well, to have enough confidence to want to do the best for themselves. We should probably help pupils be disciplined enough to remain hyper-focused on their tasks without veering off to, just one more music video on YouTube, which soon becomes 10, one after the other, or I'll just go on Facebook for 2 minutes, which then becomes 20 minutes, or, I'll just look at pornography, and before they know it, it's 3 a.m. They have an exam tomorrow and they haven't studied. So we need to figure out the best coping methods for internet addiction at large, and maintaining enough discipline to use these so that people can use these tools for their assignments. I have ethical concerns about porn anyway on both sides. It's ruinous for performers and consumers, but that's a whole other topic, of course. So something as simple as taking your laptop to a Starbucks can work wonders for focusing enough to complete one's e-learning tasks, or using machines and libraries and so on. I also love what Mr. Donald said about knowledge, wisdom being an endless chain of legacies being passed down and again and again. And the epigenetic effects of social isolation just blew my mind. I mean, of course, but it was still upsetting. And those special moments where we are fortunate enough to have chance, unplanned, spontaneous one-to-one meetings with our heroes, where they have that, where these events have a kind of mystical characteristic that feels like divine intervention. These memories are to be treasured forever for the rest of our lives. That's an important part of the human experience that digital versions or electronic copies may struggle to replicate, or even worse, compromise our abilities to experience naturally through repeated excessive use of these simulacra anyway. So thank you, great topic, and thanks for inviting me again. Good to see everyone here.
Thank you. Professor Donald?
Well, I really appreciate what Adam just said, because that's serendipity is actually one of the most valuable things in our life. I mean, I've sat down next to somebody on an airplane that absolutely blew me away, changed my life in a way from what they said. You know, my experience with Jim March that I just told you about. Those lucky accidents are kind of some of the most important things that we have in human life. So when we're designing e-education or e-business, we have to have ways that we build in. And a lot of the companies are doing that. They're making it so that they have places where people go, where they interact with each other. And it's important that you interact with people that are really different than you, if you possibly can. So IDEO, which is the premier mechanical design firm, in fact, they designed the first PDA, Personal Digital Assistant, for Palm years ago. And when they do a design meeting, they'll have a poet, an artist, a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer. They'll have this very diverse group of people that work together to do the design, so that they're not, stuck with one perspective. It's useful to have Zoom type meetings and things like that. It's very helpful, as opposed to other sorts of things where you just email documents back and forth to each other. But I've just been reading this fantastic book, and I've been looking at what we know now about neuroscience. It's a little hard to describe in a very short period of time, but I'm going to try, which is that our senses are like, we iterate for our feelings, and we iterate by action. And one of the actions we do is the movement of our eyes. So if all of a sudden I disappeared and an elephant appeared in the picture here, it's so surprising that your eyes would have to track all over the page to be able to figure out that this was an elephant or instead of me. And you're doing that constantly. Your brain is making what you expect, and then you're getting surprised. So there's these error conditions where what you think you're going to see is not there, and your brain has to solve the problem of what's actually there. And that's what we do. We're doing that 24 hours a day. We even do it in our sleep. And in order to have a learning situation, if we have a learning situation that's extremely passive, it's really hard, and it's not natural. It's not how we learn. So you can get MIT courses on calculus. Go ahead, try and learn calculus from one of those MIT courses. I challenge you. The professors are great. They have good, they're dynamic, everything about it. But sitting there passively watching somebody teach you calculus for hours on end is almost impossible. And so if we start doing things like Rob is talking about, where we have a metaverse where we can start interacting with the instructor and things like that, but then again, what do we do in that case? Because we're going to have to create scripts, and scripts aren't going to work for everybody. So a good teacher is sitting there looking at every single solitary person in that room, and they're developing empathy with every single solitary person in that room, and they're looking at every single solitary person, and they're judging, does that person get what I just said? And one of the methods that teachers use is they ask them questions. They say, did such and such and such and such, or they wait for them to ask a question, and the type of question that they ask tells the teacher a lot about where they are. And so you can say the same thing in different ways. So you realize, okay, that didn't go through. I'm going to say it in a different way to see if people understand it better. And I don't see how yet we can mimic that. Maybe someday in the future, but artificial intelligence isn't really intelligent. It's just basically very, very fast statistics that's saying, well, this is what I expect. This is the normal thing, the most normal thing. and that's all it's doing. So I think we could possibly do it, but I think that what's really important is that people have the books that they need, they have the ability to turn in their homework, that they have an ability to get to some place where they can interact with other people and use the connections that they have with other people for learning in some way. And you know, Zoom and things like that are a good, second choice. But I think you need really need both. And I think I kind of think we always will. But that's what I have to say.
Thank you everyone. This is really very good session, very good discussion, and we bring many interesting points from especially technology area and different way. And I'm requesting all of our students and the policymakers and the corporation, those who observing our show already, university like National University Singapore, International Islamic University, big very famous university from Indonesia, from China, they are also joining in World Talent Economy forums. Their policymakers, their top level already start discussion in this World Talent Economy forums. By this kind of collaborations and partnership, I'm sure we can solve many problems together. Definitely, we need to work together. We need to collaborate together, and this way we will move forward. And I'm sure this is the new norms, new world, and this new world for the youth. So World Talent Economy forums actually developing a good, better ecosystem for the youth community with the help of our expert panelists. Thank you, Professor David Schumacher, Professor Rob, Mr. Adam, and Professor Donalds for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.